The sound that echoed through the mansion that afternoon was not laughter, nor the peaceful silence that usually filled its expensive halls. It was the heartbreaking sound of a young woman trying desperately not to cry. Hidden just outside the library, a husband who had returned home hours earlier than expected froze in place. Through the slightly open door, he watched his own mother point a trembling finger at the woman carrying his unborn child. Every cruel word pierced deeper than any knife ever could. In that single moment, everything he believed about family, loyalty, and love shattered before his eyes, and what happened next would change every life inside that mansion forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness is stronger than pride and that everyone deserves love, respect, and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who believes in compassion. And subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters. Ethan Caldwell had spent years building one of the most successful architecture firms in the country. His work often took him across continents, designing breathtaking buildings while sacrificing precious moments with the people he loved. Yet through every exhausting trip, every delayed flight, and every sleepless night in hotel rooms, there was one thought that kept him moving forward. It was the promise that he would soon return home to his wife, Lily, and begin the beautiful chapter they had dreamed about for years. Lily was unlike anyone Ethan had ever met. She had not grown up surrounded by wealth or privilege. Her childhood had been filled with small apartments, second-hand clothes, and parents who worked endlessly simply to provide enough food for the family. Those humble beginnings shaped her into someone whose heart overflowed with gratitude. She found happiness in simple breakfasts together, handwritten notes, quiet evening walks, and spending time with children at the local community center. She never cared about expensive jewelry or luxury vacations. To her, love had always been life's greatest treasure. When Ethan introduced Lily to his wealthy family 3 years earlier, his father welcomed her warmly. Richard Caldwell admired her honesty and gentle nature almost immediately. But Ethan's mother, Victoria, saw only what Lily lacked. She noticed the modest background, the absence of prestigious family connections, and the fact that Lily spoke with kindness instead of arrogance. Victoria had always imagined her son marrying into another influential dynasty, someone who could strengthen the family's social standing. Lily represented everything Victoria believed was beneath the Caldwell name. Although Ethan knew his mother disapproved, he believed time would soften her heart. He underestimated how deeply pride can root itself inside someone unwilling to let go of status. After their wedding, Victoria became an expert at disguising insults as polite observations. During family dinners, she would compliment Lily's dress before mentioning how inexpensive the fabric looked. She praised Lily's cooking while suggesting professional chefs were more suitable for important occasions. Every remark sounded harmless to outsiders, yet together they slowly chipped away at Lily's confidence. Still, Lily refused to complain. Whenever Ethan apologized for his mother's behavior, Lily smiled gently and reminded him that families were complicated. She insisted that patience could accomplish what arguments never could. Ethan admired her strength without realizing how much pain she quietly carried every day. Everything seemed destined to improve when Lily discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Ethan with overwhelming joy. He canceled several international projects and promised to spend more time at home. Richard celebrated by preparing the nursery himself, laughing like a young father all over again. Even the household staff seemed happier as excitement spread throughout the mansion. Only Victoria remained unchanged. Instead of celebrating the coming baby, she became colder than ever. She questioned whether Lily possessed the sophistication necessary to raise a Caldwell heir. She criticized everything from Lily's diet to the books she read during pregnancy. Every doctor's appointment became another opportunity for Victoria to offer unwanted criticism disguised as concern. Lily tried to remain calm for the baby's sake. Each morning she stood by the nursery window, placing both hands over her growing stomach while whispering promises that her child would always know unconditional love. Those quiet moments became her refuge. She imagined tiny footsteps echoing through the halls, bedtime stories beneath warm blankets, and a future where kindness outweighed wealth. She never imagined the greatest threat to that dream lived under the same roof. 1 week before Ethan was scheduled to return from Europe, Victoria decided she had waited long enough. She instructed several housekeepers to remove Lily's personal belongings from the master bedroom while Lily attended a prenatal appointment. Family photographs disappeared from shelves. Handmade decorations Lily had carefully crafted for the nursery were boxed without explanation. Even the rocking chair Ethan had surprised her with months earlier was carried into storage. When Lily returned home, confusion quickly turned into heartbreak. Victoria calmly informed her that the master suite belonged to true members of the Caldwell family, and suggested she move into one of the guest rooms until Ethan reconsidered the marriage. She claimed the pregnancy had clouded his judgment and insisted that divorce remained the only respectable solution. The servants stood frozen. Some lowered their eyes. Others silently wiped away tears. No one dared challenge Victoria. Lily spent that evening alone in a small guest room, surrounded by cardboard boxes containing fragments of the life she thought she was building. She stared at an ultrasound photo resting on the bedside table and tried to remain strong for the little heartbeat growing inside her. Across the ocean, Ethan unexpectedly completed his project 2 days ahead of schedule. Instead of informing anyone, he planned a surprise. He imagined Lily's smile when she opened the front door. He pictured placing his hand on her stomach and finally feeling his baby kick. The 12-hour flight felt endless, but nothing prepared him for what awaited beyond the mansion gates. The moment Ethan entered the estate, something felt different. The cheerful atmosphere had vanished. Several employees avoided eye contact. One elderly gardener who had worked for the family for decades hesitated before quietly saying he was glad Ethan had come home early. Confused, Ethan hurried inside. As he approached the library, raised voices stopped him in his tracks. His mother's unmistakable voice echoed through the hallway. She was speaking with frightening cruelty. Hidden behind the half-open door, Ethan witnessed a scene that would haunt him forever. Lily stood in the center of the room wearing a simple green maternity dress. Her face was pale. One protective hand rested over her stomach, while tears silently streamed down her cheeks. Victoria stood only a few feet away, pointing toward the front entrance. Richard remained seated nearby, his expression filled with sorrow, yet years of avoiding confrontation had left him momentarily speechless. Victoria continued humiliating Lily, accusing her of trapping Ethan through pregnancy and claiming that neither she nor the baby would ever truly belong inside the Caldwell family. Every sentence grew harsher. Every word carried decades of pride and prejudice. Lily never defended herself. She simply stood there protecting the child she already loved more than her own pride. For several agonizing seconds, Ethan remained frozen. He struggled to accept what he was hearing. The mother who had taught him manners, discipline, and ambition was capable of unimaginable cruelty toward the woman who had transformed his life through love alone. Something inside him finally broke. He pushed the door open. The heavy wooden panels slammed against the wall with such force that everyone turned instantly. Silence consumed the room. Victoria smiled at first, believing her son would naturally support her. Instead, she watched his expression harden with a disappointment deeper than anger. Ethan crossed the room without saying a word. He ignored everyone else and walked directly toward Lily. Gently brushing away her tears, he wrapped both arms around her and carefully rested his hand over her stomach. Only then did he look toward his mother. The pain in his eyes said more than shouting ever could. He slowly noticed the missing wedding photographs, the empty shelves, the absence of Lily's favorite flowers. The exhaustion visible across his wife's face. Each detail revealed a story of suffering he had been too far away to witness. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood that silence could become a form of betrayal. Every business trip he had accepted, every insult he had dismissed as harmless, every promise that things would eventually improve, all of it had allowed the woman he loved to suffer alone. Richard lowered his head in shame. He realized he had failed as well. His desire to keep peace inside the household had cost someone else's peace entirely. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the mansion. Rain began falling softly against the tall windows. The weather seemed to mourn alongside the family, Ethan helped Lily sit down before quietly walking toward the nursery. He opened the door and stopped. The room they had lovingly prepared together had been stripped almost bare. Only pale outlines remained where furniture once stood. A single stuffed rabbit sat forgotten in the corner. He picked it up slowly. Its tiny stitched smile somehow made the empty room even more heartbreaking. Returning downstairs, Ethan carried the rabbit in one hand while memories flooded his mind. He remembered painting those nursery walls together. He remembered Lily laughing after accidentally getting blue paint across his face. He remembered promising their unborn child that this room would always be filled with laughter. Someone had tried to erase those dreams. But dreams built on genuine love cannot be packed into cardboard boxes. They live inside hearts. That evening, Ethan personally carried every one of Lily's belongings back into the master bedroom. The household staff quietly joined him. Without being asked, they returned every photograph, every blanket, every handmade decoration, and every precious keepsake exactly where Lily had originally placed them. No one spoke. The silence itself became an act of compassion. Even Richard rolled up his sleeves, helping rebuild the nursery piece by piece. For the first time in years, he stopped worrying about appearances and started worrying about what truly mattered. Victoria watched everything from the hallway. No one argued with her. No one sought her approval. The authority she had clung to for decades suddenly felt meaningless inside a home where love had finally found the courage to stand up for itself. As the nursery slowly returned to life, Ethan carefully hung the final picture above the crib. It was a simple wooden sign Lily had painted months earlier. It read, "Love makes a family." Looking at those words, Ethan understood that wealth could build magnificent mansions, but only kindness could create a home. The greatest inheritance parents leave behind is never money, land, or reputation. It is the example of how they treat those who are vulnerable. And from that day forward, Ethan silently vowed that his child would never grow up confusing power with love or pride with dignity. If this story has touched your heart so far, please write the words, "Love makes a family" in the comments below. Your message may inspire someone who desperately needs hope today. The rain outside gradually stopped. Golden evening sunlight broke through the clouds, shining gently into the nursery window. It illuminated the tiny crib waiting patiently for new life. It warmed the tears drying on Lily's cheeks. And it reminded everyone present that after the darkest storms, light always finds a way back, for the first time since Ethan and Lily had married. The mansion no longer felt like a place controlled by wealth or tradition. Instead, it became a home caught between two futures. One future belonged to pride, status, and old family expectations. The other belonged to forgiveness, courage, and the innocent child who would soon enter the world. Everyone living under that roof could feel the difference. Even the servants walked more quietly, as though history itself was unfolding before their eyes. Victoria spent the following days alone in the east wing of the mansion. The confidence that had always surrounded her had quietly disappeared. She expected Ethan to cool down after a few days, believing that time would erase the confrontation just as it had erased countless family arguments in the past. But this time was different. Ethan was polite whenever they crossed paths, yet the warmth that had always existed between mother and son had vanished. He no longer came to her for advice. He no longer joined her for breakfast. Every decision regarding the household now included Lily instead. Meanwhile, Lily struggled with emotions she had hidden for months. Although Ethan had stood beside her, the wounds left by constant humiliation were not healed overnight. She often woke during the night, placing both hands over her stomach whenever the baby kicked. Instead of joy, fear sometimes filled her heart. She worried that her child might someday experience the same rejection she had endured. One evening, Ethan found her sitting alone on the nursery floor, surrounded by tiny baby clothes they had carefully folded together months earlier. She was holding a pair of tiny white socks while tears rolled silently down her face. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and simply held her close. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Some pain is too deep for words. It only asks for someone's presence. That quiet evening became a turning point for Ethan. He realized protecting his family meant more than providing financial security. It meant creating an environment where they never had to question whether they belonged. The very next morning, he called the company's board of directors and officially announced that he would no longer accept overseas projects lasting more than a few days. Several executives were shocked. Some warned him it might slow the company's expansion. Ethan smiled calmly. For years, he had spent his life designing magnificent homes for strangers while rarely being present inside his own. He refused to make that mistake again. Richard watched these changes with growing admiration. Deep inside, however, guilt weighed heavily on his conscience. He remembered every family dinner when Victoria had embarrassed Lily. Every sarcastic remark, every cruel comment disguised as sophistication, he had heard them all and chosen silence. Now he understood that silence had made him part of the problem. One afternoon he visited Lily while Ethan was at work. Carrying an old wooden box covered in dust, Richard placed it gently on the dining table. Inside were family photographs dating back nearly a century. Generation after generation of Caldwells smiled from faded pictures. Richard carefully removed one empty silver frame. He handed it to Lily. He told her that frame had always been reserved for the newest generation of the family. Then, with tears filling his aging eyes, he admitted that he should have defended her from the very beginning. His voice trembled as he confessed that courage delayed is often kindness denied. Lily reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. She did not remind him of his failures. Instead, she thanked him for finally choosing love over fear. That single act of forgiveness brought peace to Richard's heart in a way money never could. Weeks passed. Autumn leaves covered the mansion grounds with shades of gold and crimson. The nursery was finally complete. Soft music often drifted through its windows as Lily prepared for motherhood. Slowly, laughter returned to the house. Yet one person remained trapped inside her own loneliness. Victoria. She wandered through enormous hallways that suddenly felt emptier than ever before. The servants treated her respectfully, but no one lingered to chat anymore. Richard spent his evenings reading stories about becoming a grandfather. Ethan devoted every spare moment to Lily. Victoria still possessed everything she had spent her life chasing. The wealth, the reputation, the beautiful mansion, yet she had never felt poorer. One rainy afternoon, she entered the nursery while no one else was home. Her eyes wandered across the tiny crib, the rocking chair, the handmade blankets. On a nearby shelf sat a small photo of Ethan and Lily smiling during their first ultrasound appointment. Victoria picked it up. For the first time, she truly looked beyond Lily's modest clothes and ordinary background. She saw a young woman whose entire face radiated love for her unborn child. Memories flooded back unexpectedly. She remembered herself as a young mother holding baby Ethan for the first time. She remembered promising she would always protect him. Somewhere along life's journey, protecting her family's name had become more important than protecting her family itself. The realization broke something inside her. When Ethan and Lily returned home, they found Victoria sitting quietly in the nursery. She looked older than either of them remembered. Pride had disappeared from her face, replaced by something far more difficult: regret. With trembling hands, she placed the ultrasound picture back onto the shelf before walking toward Lily. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Victoria's voice cracked. She admitted she had judged Lily before ever knowing her. She confessed that fear of losing the family status had blinded her to what truly mattered. She apologized not only for the cruel words, but also for every silent wound she had caused over the years. Tears streamed freely down her face. Lily listened quietly. Forgiveness did not come instantly. Some hurts require time. But Lily had learned from her own parents that bitterness only continues the cycle of pain. After a long silence, she stepped forward and gently embraced the woman who had caused her so much suffering. Victoria collapsed into tears. The walls she had spent decades building around her heart finally came crashing down. Richard quietly wiped his eyes from the doorway. Ethan looked toward the nursery window, silently thanking God for giving broken families another chance. A month later, on a crisp autumn morning, Lily went into labor. The mansion burst into activity. Ethan drove faster than he ever had in his life, though every few moments he glanced toward Lily, whispering reassuring words while holding her hand. Hours later, as the first cries of a healthy baby echoed through the hospital room, every hardship suddenly seemed worthwhile. A beautiful little girl entered the world. She had Ethan's dark hair, Lily's gentle eyes, and tiny fingers that wrapped tightly around her father's thumb. When Victoria was finally invited into the room, she hesitated outside the door. She feared she did not deserve this moment. Ethan walked over and quietly placed the baby into her arms. Victoria looked down at her granddaughter. The tiny infant opened her eyes for only a second before peacefully falling asleep again. At that moment, every title, every luxury, every social expectation disappeared. There was only love, pure, simple, unconditional. Victoria wept openly as she whispered a promise that she would spend the rest of her life becoming the grandmother that little girl deserved. The months that followed transformed the Caldwell mansion forever. The nursery became the happiest room in the house. Richard happily pushed the baby stroller through the gardens every afternoon. Victoria knitted blankets with her own hands, refusing to let anyone else do the work because she wanted every stitch to carry her love. The servants often smiled as they watched laughter replace the tension that had once haunted every hallway. And Ethan kept the promise he had made to himself. He attended every doctor appointment, every bedtime story, every first smile, every tiny milestone. His greatest achievement was no longer the skyscrapers that carried his company's name across the world. It was becoming the husband and father his family could always depend on. Years later, visitors entering the Caldwell mansion always noticed one framed wooden sign hanging above the fireplace. It simply read, "Love makes a family." Most guests assumed it was nothing more than a beautiful decoration. Only those who lived there understood its true meaning. It reminded them that respect is worth more than reputation, that kindness leaves a greater inheritance than fortune, that standing beside the people you love, even against those closest to you, is one of the bravest choices a person can ever make. Most importantly, it reminded them that even hearts hardened by pride can change when touched by genuine love. Rose, before we end this unforgettable journey, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment with the words, "Kindness always wins," if you believe love is stronger than pride. Your comment could encourage someone going through a difficult season in life. As Ethan watched his daughter take her first steps across the same mansion where her mother had once stood in tears, he realized something extraordinary. The greatest victories are not won in boardrooms, courtrooms, or grand celebrations. They are won quietly, in the moments when someone chooses compassion instead of cruelty, forgiveness instead of revenge, love instead of pride. Because in the end, no mansion is truly grand because of its marble floors or golden chandeliers. A house becomes a home only when every person inside feels valued, protected, and deeply loved. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your family and friends, subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories, and tell us in the comments what lesson stayed with you the most. Until next time, remember that kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's entire life forever.